This is the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Chris Lamberth.
And I'm Josh Havens.
We're on a journey to learn what it means to live a lifestyle of discipleship. We're glad you're joining us today and hope that as you set aside this time for God, that He will help you grow today in the everyday moments of life.
In case you haven't heard, there's a way of understanding who we are as people that's really starting to gain traction. The Enneagram consists of 9 different types that describe the way we interact with the world around us. And most importantly for Daily Growth Discipleship, it gives us another tool to use as we pursue daily transformation into the image of Jesus Christ. In Chris's book, The Sacred Enneagram, he describes much more than just a personality profile.
Chris has spent his life bearing witness to the possibility of hope in a world that has legitimate reasons to question God's goodness. Originally from Omaha, Nebraska, Chris studied at Asbury University in Kentucky before moving to India, where he was mentored by Mother Teresa for 3 years. While living in India, he helped launch South Asia's first pediatric AIDS care home, creating a safe haven for children impacted by the global pandemic. A forerunner in the New Friar movement, Chris and his wife Philena served with the New Word Made Flesh community for nearly 20 years, working for women and children victimized by human traffickers in the commercial sex industry. His vocation has taken him to over 70 countries, working among the most vulnerable in the world's poor. In 2012, Philena and Chris launched Gravity, a center for contemplative activism.
Understanding your type can open ways to understand who you are and what God is doing in your life. In today's chapter, Chris gives us a brief introduction to each of the 9 types. But before you get wrapped up in trying to identify your type, take Chris's advice from the last episode to heart and spend some time exploring this concept with another person. So Chris, if you would, give us kind of a brief introduction to each one of the 9 types. Like, what makes each one of the 9 types tick?
To sort of run around the color wheel of type, and I like to say that the Enneagram is sort of a color wheel, that each of these numbers blend or bleed into the numbers on either side of them, and this is what the wing theory is about. We can sort of point one, and like we said, type 1 is sometimes called the reformer, the perfectionist, is the need to be needed. These are the folks who are somehow, like I said, afraid that they are inherently corrupt, but they're incredibly principled, responsible. Their structure is incredibly important to them, and you know, like my teacher and friend Father Richard Rohr, who's also a 1, says every unrealistic expectation is a resentment waiting to happen. 1s aim a lot of resentment at themselves for not being better than they think they are. And so really have to have compassion for 1s, because if they come across fussy or grumpy or a little critical, if they're letting that out, if they're leaking that, they're leaking the leftovers. I mean, they're beating themselves up all day long and criticizing themselves ferociously. So it's tough. It's tough being a 1. The 2 is sometimes called the helper, the giver. This is the need to be needed. These are the heart-forward, nurturing folks that are really the embrace of humanity. And we love to be loved by them, but you see this fuels and perpetuates their basic fear, which is of not being loved for who they are, but really being loved for what they give. And so they deny a lot of what they need. They're not honest with what they want. They sometimes feel that they have to self-abnegate, right? Give themselves away at their own expense to convince themselves that that's what's going to make them happy. But really, that's also part of the source of their sadness. And so, you know, if you have friends in your life who are 2, it really is sort of our work to get into their hearts and to really learn to love them in the ways that they intuitively and naturally love us. But if you're 2, you're going to have to actually be able to also receive that love and realize that it's not selfish, that you aren't the only one born to serve and meet the needs of everybody else, but that there's somebody out there, and there is something in our responsibility of mirroring that back and giving that back. Now, if you're a 3, this is sometimes called the performer or the achiever. This is the need to succeed, but 3s are not the most ambitious of the types. They're not the most driven of the types. It's just that the 3s have maybe the most hollowed or empty heart. And so as little kids, to try to fill the emptiness of their hearts, they substituted love, which they could have simply received in most cases. They substituted love for recognition, affirmation, reward. They substituted it for the sort of low-hanging fruit of I'm gonna grab for this and then I'm going to stuff this into the hollowness. And that was a quick fix, and it was effective, but it still wasn't satisfying. So what happened was they became driven, and their drive really, like I said, isn't. I mean, it's horrible to sort of loophole them in this. It's not the drive to succeed. It's simply that, just like all of us in 9 different ways, they want to be loved. They're maybe just the most obvious on a subconscious level about that. So the fear here is that they do not have intrinsic value, so they ascribe value to everyone in their lives and everything that they do. And again, this comes back to this fear. This ascribing and adding value is simply on a subconscious level their efforts to say, the more valuable you are, maybe the more lovable you are, and the more value I can add in my environment, maybe the more lovable I'll become. And so for 3s, it really is learning not to stuff the hollowness of your heart with a substitute, but it's really to say yes, to surrender to love. 4s, this is sometimes called the individualist or the romantic. This is the need to be unique. And poor 4s get beat up pretty hard in the literature. And I feel a lot of sympathy for them because they are really hard to really sort of capture and understand. There's just something remarkable about them, and almost no 2 4s are even remotely close. And so if you have a bunch of 4s in the room, they're sort of side-eyeing each other like, no, that person mistyped, they're not 4 enough, I'm the only 4 here. That's true. Like, if there's 4 4s in the room, there's really only 1 4. I mean, they're that different. But you see, the drive here is this fear that they somehow don't have sort of a connection to the ultimate source of their being. And so they've lost an aspect of their identity. And in this loss of identity, they're out there seeing what's beautiful and significant in everybody else. And this is one of the reasons they sort of get, it's unfortunate, it's unfair, but this is one of the reasons they sort of get sort of cliched out as, oh, really artistic or sometimes dramatic or incredible with aesthetic, or every word in the song matters to them. Well, what they're simply doing is projecting outside of themselves what they can't reconcile inside themselves. And so if they can see what's beautiful and significant in everything, in their environment, in their friendships, and their partner, what they're hoping is that would also be mirrored back to them so that they'll be able to see what's beautiful about them. But they have to see this first and foremost for themselves. And because they somehow feel like they can't, they suffer that. And there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of angst in the heart of the 4. And if you work with 4s, if there's people in your lives who are 4s, the worst thing you can do is call them overly dramatic or too sensitive. Yes, their sensitivity is amazing, and that's part of their fluency. Their emotional intelligence is brilliant, but that's their gift, and we have to learn to honor that. The 5 is sometimes called the theorist, the observer, the investigator. This is the most cerebrally withdrawn of the types. These folks are way up in their head, and just like the 4, the 5 is sort of has this withdrawn or detached social style to get what it is that they want. The 4s want that connection and affection. The 5s want security. And so they're going to flip over every question, every answer. They will get to the bottom of it, but it might look pokey to those who aren't 5s. They are thorough. And so they'll be slow to make a decision until they have all the information. Poor 5s in the traditional language in the Enneagram sort of get tagged with this passion of avarice, which is, a form of greed. And it's not that 5's greedy. In fact, if a 5 chooses you, they may be the most generous person out there. It's just they're slow to make choices. They're slow to say yes because they sort of need to suss it out. They need to size folks up. They need to really evaluate every scenario and situation before they make a commitment. But there's a brilliance there, and their minds are the most complex and maybe have the most depth of all types. The 6 is sometimes called the skeptic or the loyalist. It's the need to be secure. These are the threat forecasters, contingency planners. These are the worst case scenario thinkers who are doubling down on what concerns them, not because they want to wind up this inner anxiety but they want to threat forecast so that they can keep everybody that they care for safe. And so they're going to go there for us. They're going to think through all of the most dire and extreme scenarios of how something could go wrong. And man, that creates a lot of inner angst. But ironically, they're doing this as a way of, on a subconscious level, trying to offer love and support. And that's really the fear here, is that they won't then be supported. And so if they're looking outside of themselves for support, this leads to a lot of second guessing of themselves, a lot of doubt. And that's a bummer, because when sixes really align with the gift of their essence, that gift is courage. That gift is true faith, and we will follow them anywhere. The seven, this is the enthusiast. This is the need to avoid pain. This is the just playful, curious, imaginative individual who brings such levity and joy to everything. But you see, all of the energy that keeps the seven sort of up and moving forward is the energy of running from those places in their own heart that may actually be inviting them to compassion. And so rather than facing their own pain or even exploring it as a place of practicing discernment and learning to tell themselves the truth, they can get involved in other people's drama, other people's pain. And so they can be really good therapists or humanitarians. They're super fast thinkers, incredible problem solvers. And, a huge bummer for them is when they're not taken seriously. But you see, so much of how they present is with such playful levity that when the stakes get high, our muscle memory is to dismiss them. So it's important to really listen to the subtext there, because there's a kind of brilliance here that's often underappreciated. The eight, they is a challenger. This is the need to be against. These are the contrarians of the Enneagram. These are the folks who fight and push and sass and hassle people, and that's their love language, because they're building trust. They're trying to protect their inner child, and they don't want that inner child to be wounded or taken advantage of. So what they do is they project that by finding vulnerabilities outside themselves that they will then defend or protect. And so you love it. If you have a friend who's an eight, they're going to get your back. I mean, I sort of landed myself in this little Twitter fight with somebody the other day because I thought he was picking on a friend of mine who's been picked on enough. And I got at it. And, of course I regret that, but that's what's triggered in all of us when we are unobserving type. Now, eights, poor eights, man. When I introduce eights, somebody's always like, oh yeah, I used to work with a really unhealthy eight. And I'm like, no, they were probably just an eight. You probably just didn't stand up for yourself. And yes, an unhealthy eight is a terrible person, but eights really do sort of make you own your own strength and really make you sort of own your own power. And so if there's an eight in your life, push back. Don't let them stomp around on you. And that's how you're going to earn their trust. But if you're an eight, you also, like I said, have to really be honest about your vulnerabilities and really let yourself be reintroduced to that inner child, because that's the source of your innocence, and that's where your truth will be experienced. And finally, nines, this is the mediator, this is the arbitrator, this is the peacemaker, this is the need to avoid. And poor nines, as little kids, just minimized everything that was important to them. Because nines are a source of love. They sit at the top of the circle, and that's really the gift of their holy idea and their virtue, which is love in action. So as a little kid, they felt like it wasn't loving. They felt like it was selfish if they expressed their opinions or their needs or what they wanted or exerted themselves. So like I said, they minimized what was important to them. They minimized themselves as a way of making everybody else more important, as a way of trying to be loving, but then got forgotten along the way and started to self-forget. And the self-forgetting leads to a lot of rumination. So you see nines really flipping things over in their head, but having a lot of difficulty bringing them forward. And so nines, I mean, I love nines. I think nines are some of the most remarkable people out there. Just need to know it's okay to center themselves. And in fact, if you want to be a source of love, you have to love yourself first.
And thank you for that. I think it's so helpful to have a good understanding of these types, because, I do have an eight that I work with. And then after you're reading your book, because you find yourself asking, like, why is this person combative? Like sometimes you could just like come in and say, oh man, isn't it doesn't the weather feel great outside? And they were going to fight you on it. And I literally used that as an example once. And after reading the book, it's sort of like, oh, okay, they're not just combative. And you really do, it humanizes us so much to be able to look at a person and see that, no, that's not just a flaw, but that is a created purpose that they have. And God can use that to do something beautiful through who He's created them to be. And so again, I love that perspective and keeping this all in mind. I wish we could dive deeper. I'm looking at our time, and so I want to move on to a few other things, and everybody will have to just go and get the book and read it to dive deeper into the Enneagram and try to discover that.
I would highly encourage you to go and check out enneaapp.com. You can find a link in the show notes, and there you'll be able to take a test to kind of help you determine your basic type. But don't let that box you into thinking that you are only that type. Like Chris said, the Enneagram is really kind of a color wheel, and each one of the types blend and morph into one another a little bit. In addition to that, walk through this with somebody else. Find somebody else who can kind of be a sounding board as you look at the different types. Have conversations and ask each other, am I really this kind of a person? Does a 4 really describe me, or does a 1 really describe me? And it's that walking together through this experience with someone else that can really be a powerful tool for spiritual growth and transformation. So today, as you go about your day, find somebody else that you can talk to about your Enneapp test results, and then go and get Chris's book, The Sacred Enneagram, and check out what he has to say about each one of those types in a little more depth. You can also check out the Enneagram Institute, and they have a brief description on each one of the types that goes into a little bit more depth than what Chris went into here on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. If you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening at Daily Growth, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and subscribe for free. Or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.